When I finished the Fonz, I could not get hired really as an actor.
To the world, Henry Winkler was the Fonz. He was cool in a leather jacket, charming with a heart of gold. Everyone knew the swagger, the thumbs up, the legend. But behind the scenes, there were names he never forgot. Not because they inspired him, but because they made everything bitter. These were people who sat in directors' chairs like parasites, co-stars who were too empty inside to care about anyone else, writers who twisted plots out of spite instead of creativity. They didn't just work against him. They smiled while doing it. He doesn't raise his voice now. He doesn't need to. Silence, he's learned, cuts deeper than shouting. It stays with you longer. I didn't get mad, Henry says. I remembered. I studied. I waited. Every fake compliment he gave, every forced laugh when the cameras rolled, every moment he pretended it didn't hurt. He kept track of it all. Each memory was sharpened like a knife, filed away under names he planned to deal with when the cameras stopped rolling and the last handshake ended. They thought he was soft. They thought being kind meant being weak. But he's not kind anymore. Not really. He's patient. And nothing falls apart faster than a fake friend when the spotlight moves away. Ron Howard, the quiet saboteur. First on his list was Ron Howard. Yes, that Ron Howard. He's lovely, Henry says, his smile cutting like a blade. He's also the only man I've met who could turn being decent into a weapon. He could use politeness like a tool for sabotage. Ron didn't plan or scheme in the usual way. He waited. He stood there in his perfect stillness, just existing. He let the producers slowly move toward him like sheep following a shepherd. He let the directors start cutting Henry's scenes, not because Ron asked for it, but because he was easier to work with. He was more bendable, more likable to the suits upstairs. He was like a blank page that everyone could write on. Somehow, without even asking for it, the Fonz, the breakout character, the lightning bolt, the reason people watched the show, ended up playing second fiddle to a man whose main talent was blinking on cue. I'd deliver the punchline, Henry says, and he'd nod like he'd thought of the joke first. The crowd would clap for him, for his grace, his modesty, like he was doing me a favor by not interrupting. Ron didn't steal scenes in an obvious way. That would have taken effort. Instead, he simply absorbed them, like wallpaper that you start noticing more than the furniture, like mold that convinces you it belongs in the design. He was a sponge with dimples. He had that corn-fed stillness, Henry continues. You know what I mean? The kind of guy who could eat oatmeal and somehow the whole room would thank him for it. One time, Henry got a rewrite. 4 lines were cut. 4 good lines that had rhythm and punch. When he asked why, they said they were refocusing the show. He laughs, but there's no humor in it. On what? Freckles? The art of breathing quietly? Ron had the kind of face that made executives dream about selling merchandise. His squint alone could move lunchboxes off store shelves. It didn't matter that he brought nothing special to scenes. He looked like he might, and that was enough. You couldn't get angry at him either. That was the trick. It was like trying to punch a shadow. He made being mediocre look noble. Henry says it was brilliant in its own pathetic way. While Henry was sweating through difficult speeches, jumping over bars, making everything feel real, Ron stood in corners and got standing ovations for not ruining the mood. The silence after his lines wasn't subtle acting. It was just emptiness. But somehow the editors made it look like wisdom, like some quiet, all-knowing farm boy wisdom. America ate it up. You know the real heartbreak? Henry asks. He never even knew he was doing it. That made it worse. If he had known, I could have hated him cleanly. But he just stood there smiling that sheepish smile while the show crumbled behind his damn dimples. He pauses, his jaw tight. I used to rehearse until my throat was raw. I'd work in front of mirrors, try new things, take risks. I learned how to cry on command while he blinked like a confused cow and won a People's Choice Award. He wasn't even acting. That's what killed me. He wasn't trying. It was like trying to compete with fog. You can't wrestle mist. You can't outshine emptiness. Henry's voice drops lower. They told me once to be more like him. Try stillness, they said. So I did. I stood on set like a scarecrow for 3 episodes and the ratings dropped. But when he did it, it was soulful. When he did it, it was Midwestern zen. He scoffs. I once delivered a line so well that a crew member cried. You know what they aired instead? Ron squinting, saying nothing. Just that face, blank, thoughtful, empty as a cereal box. And suddenly, that became the moment. That became the heartbeat of the show. He rubs his temples, exhausted by the memory. They say nice guys finish last, but Ron coasted to the finish line with a smile and a flannel shirt, and we called it charisma. Scott Baio, the pretty replacement. Second was Scott Baio. He came in smelling like a spin-off. Henry mutters, dragging the words like he's chewing rusty nails. Like he already had a lunchbox deal and a Saturday morning cartoon planned out. And everyone acted like it was meant to be. Chachi was cute. Chachi was safe. He was a walking teen magazine poster wrapped in denim and marketing appeal. He was network candy, a rating sugar pill. He didn't push any boundaries. He posed, smiled, blinked, said his lines like he was Aditi, owning for toothpaste commercials, and America swallowed it whole. Henry became the old furniture, a leftover from before the studio figured out how to sell wholesomeness in bulk, before they replaced attitude with dimples and rewrote cool to mean non-threatening. Scott smiled like he'd earned it, Henry says, his voice getting harder. Like he'd broken new ground. But he didn't build that audience. He borrowed mine. He coasted on a road I built while the executives patted his head and told him he was the future. All he had to do was show up and not choke on his own words. He leans back, eyes narrowed. That kid thought timing was just something editors fixed later. Then there was the backstage interview. Scott Baio, barely old enough to shave, leaning into the microphone like he had wisdom to share. He called the Fonz training wheels. Henry doesn't flinch. I heard it, he says. I never told him I did. I thought it was better to let Karma handle it. A pause. Turns out Karma's a bit slow. Maybe she got distracted. Maybe she had a crush on Chachi, too. He shakes his head. That punk got handed a legacy like it was a hand-me-down jacket. He didn't have to fight for moments. He inherited them. He walked in, winked, and suddenly he's the new face. I was still carrying the weight of a decade on my shoulders, holding the tone, keeping the rhythm, and he's getting applause for saying, hey, like he's doing me a favor. Henry's laugh is hollow. You know the worst part? People still ask me what Chachi was like I was the side act, like I was lucky to be there for his rise. He lights a cigarette, inhales deeply. The tip glows like a tiny wound. He was a mascot, a prop with cheekbones. But props don't know they can be replaced. They think they're stars until the lights shift. Another drag. The smoke curls upward into the stale air. He didn't carry the show. He didn't even carry his scenes. They carried him. Editors polished his pauses. Directors put him in the safest spots. Writers smoothed the sharp edges so he wouldn't cut himself on the script. Henry looks off somewhere past the room. He made mediocrity look like promise. That was his gift. Not talent, not heart, just potential. He was an empty cup everyone swore was full. A long silence. And the network drank it. They drank it like fine wine. Meanwhile, I'm still trying to scrub his aftertaste off the culture. He stubs the cigarette out, the ashtray rattling. Forget Chachi. Tom Bosley, America's poisonous dad. Third was Tom Bosley. America's dad. That's what they called him. Mr. Wholesome, Mr. Integrity. A voice like syrup and a face that could sell breakfast cereal. But behind closed doors, he was like a warm blanket full of wasps, Henry says. Soft until you moved. Then sting after sting. Quiet, polite poison. Bosley had opinions, always delivered with that practiced fatherly tone like he was doing you a kindness by slowly tearing you apart. He'd criticize Henry's hair, his boots, the angle of his famous thumbs. He wrapped his attacks in folksy charm as if that made the blow softer, like passive aggression was somehow mentorship. Once, Henry says, he looked at me after a take, dead silent, and said, "You should try saying it more like a person and less like a jukebox." It got a chuckle from the crew, those nervous go-along laughs people give when the boss makes a joke with teeth. Henry laughed too on set, grinned like it rolled off him. Then he walked back to his trailer and cried for 20 straight minutes. Couldn't even take off the jacket. He just sat there, leather sticking to his skin, humiliated in stereo. America's dad, he repeats, almost spitting the phrase. Sure, if your dad belittled you between takes and called it helpful feedback, Bosley had a way of making you doubt your instincts. Death by suggestion. He didn't need to yell. He didn't even need to be right. He just had to plant the seed. Was that too broad? Too gimmicky? Too Fonzie? And then he'd pat you on the back like a priest after confession, leaving you wondering if you'd just been forgiven or damned. He once asked Henry if he ever thought about acting more subtly. Like I was miming in traffic, Henry says, like I wasn't already cutting everything down to the bone just to fit in. That kind of criticism sticks with you. You carry it home, into your sleep, into your choices. It clings to your ribs, shows up years later in interviews, in auditions, in how you smile when you talk about the good old days. And it wasn't just the criticism itself, it was the timing. He'd wait until just before a big scene, or right after a good take. He'd undercut your confidence, twist the knife when the camera wasn't rolling, then play the saint when it was. There was this one day, Henry says, voice low. We'd nailed a moment. Chemistry, flow, laughs in all the right places. The director was beaming, and Bosley pulls me aside real gentle-like he's about to offer stock advice, and he says, "You ever consider giving the character a little more range? Like I'd been playing a kazoo while he was composing symphonies." Henry shakes his head. You couldn't even fight it. He was too nice. That was the trap. He smiled when he cut you. People saw the smile and missed the wound. He leans back, jaw tight. America's dad? Sure. Just pray you weren't his kid. A pause. Because if you were, you learned early that approval didn't come free. It came in riddles, in backhanded blessings, in compliments with expiration dates. And you kept coming back for more, hoping the next one would land clean. He looks down at his hands like they belong to someone else. That's the legacy. Not the warmth, not the wisdom. Just a trail of people still trying to earn a nod that was never meant to be given. A beat. Then quietly, he made doubt look like love. And we thanked him for it. John Ritter, the award thief. Fourth was John Ritter. We never even worked together. Not once, Henry says, shaking his head. Not in a scene, not on a set. Hell, I don't even think we shared a parking lot. And yet he kept winning. He'd beat me for awards every time, Henry mutters, like clockwork. I'd smile, he'd wave, and inside I was imagining pushing him down a flight of tasteful mid-century stairs. Real clean lines, good lighting, just enough to bruise him artistically. He doesn't say the name, he doesn't need to. Everyone knows who he means. The darling, the critic's pet, always perfectly messy-haired, always blinking into the lights like he didn't expect to win, as if humility was baked into his DNA, the opposite of the Fonz. He'd thank his mother, quote a playwright, make some quiet joke about just doing the work, and the room would melt. And Henry would sit there in his tuxedo, applauding the guy who read lines with the emotional range of a damp sponge. Henry never hated the work itself. He hated the reaction, the way the room bent toward the other guy, how sincerity got confused with talent, how stillness got mistaken for depth. I was swinging for the fences every week. Physicality, voice, rhythm, selling it all. And he'd stand there like he was trying not to wake a sleeping baby. And they'd call him transformative. It didn't matter what the role was. Didn't matter who wrote it or who watched it. If Henry's name was on the nomination list, his competitor's name was one slot above it. Lead actor, supporting, guest spot, daytime, primetime, local charity segments. If they handed out a plaque for most magnetic presence at a craft services table, he'd probably take that too. I started keeping different smiles in my pocket, Henry says. Practiced them on the drive over. Gracious defeat number 3, pained but proud number 7. Learning to clap without cracking my knuckles. There was one year when Henry thought he had it. A monologue, raw, one take, the kind of performance that empties everything you have. I bared everything, took risks. You could hear a pin drop. They said the air in the room changed. and they gave the award to his competitor for whispering into a payphone for 2 minutes and hanging up like he just solved the mystery of grief. He breathed heavily, blinked, hung up, and walked away. That was it. And the headlines read, "Devastating Restraint, Minimalist Masterpiece. Meanwhile, I'm bleeding charisma and getting notes about my thumbs." He exhales sharply. Not quite a sigh, more like steam releasing pressure. They say awards don't matter, but that's only what the losers say. And I should know. I made a career of saying it with a smile. Then softer, you start to wonder if you were ever in the same race. If maybe they were grading on a different curve, like I was painting murals and he was shrugging in black and white, and somehow he was the visionary. Henry looks down at his hands, rubs his thumb like it still carries the memory of applause he never quite got. I used to think the work would outlast the trophies. That craft spoke louder than politics. But you get older and your name's on fewer ballots, and suddenly his whispering looks like wisdom, and my best work gets called nostalgia. He blinks once, slowly. They gave him the legacy. I just kept the reruns. Danny Bonaduce, Cocaine and Corduroy. Fifth was Danny Bonaduce. Cocaine and Corduroy, Henry mutters, eyes narrowing like the phrase still stings his tongue. That's what he was. Loud, sweaty charm with nothing underneath. A grin stretched over pure combustion. Danny was always just Danny, a whirlwind of lapels and blow-dusted sunglasses crashing into promotional events like he was double-booked with God himself. He was the kind of guy who thought volume was a virtue and interruptions were wit. They only crossed paths at junkets, parties, red carpet things where everyone pretended to like each other while measuring everyone else's popularity ratings. Henry played the game. Smile, shake hands, extend the olive branch. He said hello. Danny didn't even pause, didn't blink. Just looked him up and down and fired. Fawns? More like fog. You're past it, man. Over. People want speed now. Movement. Not leather jackets and catchphrases. Henry didn't respond out loud, but something curled tight in his chest. And that's when it started. That's when I started keeping track, he says, of names, of quotes, of faces. It wasn't a list exactly, not at first. More like a tally, a mental burn book of who smiled too hard when someone mocked me, who called me retro like it was a compliment, who got too comfortable saying used to be. Danny was just the first name I underlined twice. Red pen. Mentally, I mean. I didn't keep a real list. Not then. But the habit grew. After enough events, enough whispers, enough polite digs masquerading as jokes, Henry could practically recite the roll call of people who treated him like a statue in a wax museum. Admired, irrelevant, unmoving. They said he peaked, like charm had an expiration date, like cool couldn't evolve. Danny, of course, burned bright and fast, flamed out, in a pile of scandals and late-night mugshots. The corduroy lost its shine. The laughs faded. The phone stopped ringing. And I didn't feel good about it, Henry lies. I didn't celebrate. I just crossed his name off. There's a long silence, then a flicker of a smile. Okay, maybe I poured a drink, but just the one. The smile disappears. There were still a lot of names left. Donnie Most, the Jester's Rebellion. Sixth was Donnie Most, Ralph Malph, the funny one. Until he wasn't, Henry says. Until he decided he was actually funny. It was subtle at first. An extra tag here, a look there, a little extra flourish on a line that wasn't his. Harmless stuff, but Henry saw it, felt it. The rhythm starting to shift, the center of gravity moving. Donnie was always the jester, Henry says. He lived in the background. That was the balance. Fonzie was the cool. Richie was the heart. Ralph was the noise. But then came the episode. The one where Donnie went rogue. A scene at Arnold's. Nothing major, just Henry's big final beat, the signature wink, the closer. And then Donnie decided to do a pratfall. Totally improvised, Henry says coldly. Trips on a chair, flails, lands in a ketchup tray. The audience lost it. Huge laugh. Stole the air right out of my moment. Killed the landing. Henry's line, tight and perfectly timed, hit the stage like a balloon after a gunshot. No one noticed at first except me and Donnie. And that was the problem. Donnie knew. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He smiled like a man who'd found a door he wasn't supposed to open and liked the view on the other side. That's when I knew something had to give, Henry says. The show only had room for one center of gravity, and it wasn't going to be a guy in plaid pants who suddenly thought he was George Carlin. The rest of the shoot was civil, professional, but something changed. The vibe, the balance. Suddenly, Thicke was steering the tone, doing rewrites mid-sentence, throwing in jokes that weren't on the page, and the director loved it. They said he had relatable authority, Henry says, like he'd already raised you and now he was just checking in. Henry did his lines, hit his marks, smiled for the kids. But behind my eyes, I never forgave him. Never forgot the moment. Never forgot who smiled when I lost the room. He leans back, arms crossed. And I never shot another PSA. The final reckoning. Henry Winkler sits back now, older, quieter, but with eyes that still burn with the memory of every slight, every stolen moment, every smile that cut like a knife. The leather jacket is long gone, but the man inside it remembers everything. Every name, every face, every moment when Hollywood showed him exactly where he stood in their eyes. They thought I was just the Fonz, he says finally. A character they could retire when the show ended. But I was always more than that. I was watching. I was learning. I was remembering. He pauses, looking out at something only he can see. And I'm still here, still working, still creating. While most of those names, well, let's just say some stories end better than others. The silence stretches between past and present, between the young man who jumped over sharks and the older one who learned that in Hollywood, the real sharks swim in much deeper waters. But Henry Winkler survived them all, and in surviving, he found something more valuable than any award or acclaim: the quiet satisfaction of outlasting those who tried to diminish him. The work speaks for itself, he says. Always has, always will, and that's the only voice that really matters in the end. The next week, Donnie was mysteriously written out of the cold open. No warning, no explanation, just not there. The camera didn't linger. The cast didn't mention it. I didn't ask questions, Henry says, voice like silk wrapped around steel. But I brought donuts to the writer's room, 24, still warm. The writers thanked him, called him generous. One of them said, "You really take care of us." Henry just smiled and said, "You take care of me." Donnie was back the following episode, but quieter, smaller, reined in. No improv, just Ralph Malph again, harmless as ever. He never tried to steal a scene again, Henry says, sipping his coffee. And that's the thing about comedy. Timing is everything. You step on someone's beat, you better make sure they don't control the script. Alan Thicke, the Canadian correction. 7th was Alan Thicke. They shared one PSA in the early 80s. A quick shoot, light script, harmless premise. Say no to drugs, believe in yourself, smile for the camera, collect the check. 2 professionals, 1 camera. A room full of wide-eyed kids staring up like they were watching superheroes talk about the dangers of peer pressure. It should have been easy. It was easy until Thicke opened his mouth. He corrected my line reading, Henry says, still stunned decades later. On camera, in front of children. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't subtle. They had just finished a take. Henry had leaned in, voice calm, message heartfelt, giving the kids the weight of the Fonz but with warmth underneath. Then Thicke leaned over, all teeth and cologne, and whispered loud enough for the microphone to pick up. Try less cool, more concerned. Henry froze. Not because it hurt, but because of who it came from. Alan Thicke, Mr. Game Show, the human necktie. A guy whose acting range peaked somewhere between light chuckle and scripted fatherly pause. And here he was, giving direction like he was running the network. Imagine Alan Thicke telling you how to deliver sincerity, Henry says, each word dipped in acid. I should have shoved him into a fern. One of those tall fake ones. Let him emerge looking like he lost a fight with a decorative jungle. The crew laughed awkwardly, thinking it was all in good fun. But Henry saw it. The smirk in Thicke's eye the moment he tasted control. It was a power move, Henry mutters, wrapped in a smile. That Canadian smoothness, like you should thank him for the insult.